Hey everyone, D&D Detective here. So I thought I'd do a video on what I think are the top 5 spells in Kobold Press's Deep Magic. To be clear, these are not the most powerful spells, they are just the ones I happen to like the most. Runner-up, Ashen Memories. This is a second level ritual spell that takes a minute to cast normally. It is recommended for the Bard, Cleric, and Wizard spell lists, with a description that says this: you touch the ashes, embers, or soot left behind by a fire and receive a vision of one significant event that occurred in the area while the fire was burning. For example, if you were to touch the cold embers of a campfire, you might witness a snippet of a conversation that occurred around the fire. Similarly, touching the ashes of a burned letter might grant you a vision of the person who destroyed the letter or the contents of the letter. You have no control over what information the spell reveals, but your vision usually is tied to the most meaningful event related to the fire. The GM determines the details of what is revealed. So it's a bit weird that the spell isn't suggested for druids and rangers. Rangers can't cast ritual spells, but it still fits their theme well. But this is a great spell for players that are looking to gain some insight into who has been nearby. Don't forget, this works on fireplaces and stoves, so it's not just campfires out in the woods somewhere. So it's a great way for players to gain information, and especially things they might not be able to glean from other sources. That said, don't forget that casting this spell requires concentration, even if you don't cast it as a ritual. Because if you cast a spell that takes more than an action to cast, the casting requires concentration. So they may find the trade-off of losing concentration on another spell to not be worth it. Number 5, Ale-Dritch Blast. Ale-Dritch Blast is obviously a fun take on the Ale-Dritch Blast spell. It's a cantrip that has a 60 feet range that takes an action to cast. It's recommended for the Bard, Druid, and Wizard spell lists, though the Beard Domain Cleric also gets it automatically. Its description reads: a stream of ice-cold ale blasts from your outstretched hands toward a creature or object within range. Make a ranged spell attack against the target. On a hit, it takes 1d8 cold damage, and it must make a successful Constitution saving throw, or be poisoned until the end of its next turn. A targeted creature has disadvantage on the saving throw if it has drunk any alcohol within the last hour. The damage increases when you reach higher levels: 2d8 at level 5, 3d8 at level 11, and 4d8 at 17th level. So the fact that this also poisons the target on a failed Constitution save, at least until the end of their next turn, makes it pretty great. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that it does have half the range of Eldritch Blast and Firebolt, and you are only making the one ranged attack. So unlike, say, Eldritch Blast, you do just get the one chance at hitting, and can only hit one target. Number 4, Reposition. This is a 4th level conjuration spell that Kobold Press recommends for the spell lists of bards, sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards. It takes a bonus action to cast, has a range of 30 feet, and only has a vocal component. Its description reads: you designate up to 3 friendly creatures, one of which can be yourself, within range. Each target teleports to an unoccupied space of its choosing that it can see within 30 feet of itself. At higher levels, when you cast the spell using a spell slot of 5th level or higher, the spell targets one additional friendly creature for each spell slot above 4th. So this has some great tactical applications. As a bonus action, it also still leaves you free to use a cantrip or make attacks on a turn. It also leaves it up to the creature themselves to decide where they want to move. But it's the kind of spell where you can teleport the mage away from where they are getting hammered by enemies, and then replace them with your party's melee character. Full caster Gishes, like Pact of the Blade Warlocks with the Thirsting Blade invocation, Valor or Sword Bards, as well as Blade Singers, can also still do multiple attacks the turn that they cast it, so it's a really tactically useful spell. Number 3, Hobble. This is a cantrip that takes a bonus action to cast. It has a range of 30 feet. It's recommended for the spell lists of all full casters, including warlocks. Its description reads as follows. You create an ethereal trap in the space of a creature you can see within range. The target must succeed on a dexterity saving throw, or its speed is halved until the end of its next turn. So this spell being a bonus action cantrip is huge, as is the fact this effect stacks with difficult terrain and getting up from being prone. It's particularly good when being used during a chase, but it's also useful for warlocks because you can use it to limit an enemy's movement and still cast Ale-Dritch Blast all on the same turn. Number 2, Channel Fiendish Power. This is a 5th level spell that takes an action to cast and that has a duration of 10 minutes. And this is its description. You infuse yourself with dark power from the lower planes, which grants you magical gifts for a short time. While this spell is in effect, your body takes on minor fiendish characteristics. Scales, a reddish or greenish hue to your skin, small horns protruding from your forehead, or other such features. While this spell is in effect, you gain 2 of the following abilities. Dark Vision within a range of 120 feet, unimpeded by magical darkness. Immunity to fire damage. Immunity to poison damage and the poison condition. Advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. Resistance to one of the following damage types. Cold, fire, or lightning. Resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from weapons that aren't silvered. Resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons. Claws that grant you a melee weapon attack that deal 1d8 slashing damage. Wings that grant you a flying speed of 60 feet. At higher levels, when you cast it using a spell slot of 6th level or higher, you can choose one additional benefit to be granted by the spell for each slot above 5th level. So it's worth noting that the first effect regarding dark vision still means that areas that are in non-magical darkness are still dim light to you. Like this isn't quite the same as the Warlock Invocation. The spell gives a ton of different options for you to choose from. Some of these are clearly better than others. For instance, I'm not sure why you'd take resistance to fire when you can just have immunity. And likewise, getting resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from weapons that aren't silvered is considerably better than just getting it from non-magical weapons, because technically, the former of these even works on magical weapons. And the claws, of course, are not good either. But I still think, even with all this, it gives some really interesting options, and I like it a lot. It also isn't a concentration spell, and it lasts 10 minutes, which gives it a lot more utility than other spells like it. Kobold Press suggests that the spell is for sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards, but I think this is one of those spells that works really well for a reward for completing some dark task. Number 1, Storm of Wings. This is a 4th level spell that takes your action to cast, requires concentration, has a 60-foot range, and lasts a minute. Its description says, you create a storm of spectral birds, bats, or flying insects in a 15-foot radius sphere on a point you see within range. The storm spreads around corners, and its area is lightly obscured. Each creature in the storm, when it appears, and a creature that starts its turn in the storm, are affected by the storm. As a bonus action on your turn, you can move the storm up to 30 feet. As an action on your turn, you can change the storm from one type to another, such as from a storm of bats to a storm of insects. Bats. The creature takes 4d6 necrotic damage, and its speed is halved while within the storm, as the bats cling to it and drain its blood. The bird option, on the other hand, is that the creature takes 4d6 slashing damage and has disadvantage on attack rolls while within the storm, as birds fly in the way of the creature's attacks. Insects. The creature takes 4d6 poison damage, and it must make a Constitution saving throw each time it casts a spell while within the storm. On a failed save, the creature fails to cast the spell, losing the action, but not the spell slot. So I think this is a great tactical option for a spell, whether it's for controlling spell casting, how successful enemies are with attacks, or how much enemies can move. You get some really solid options here, but it's great also that you can move it around to a degree with your bonus action. If you're willing to use your action on another turn, you can even change its type. So if, say, the caster you had intended for it to be used on has died, you can move the storm 30 feet, and then you can use your action to make it birds instead, giving disadvantage on creatures' attacks in that area while doing damage. Now, I suppose the downside with this spell is that its radius is small enough that characters could move outside of it in their turn. However, the fact that it spreads around corners makes it particularly useful, especially in dungeon environments, and overall, I just like its versatility. Alright, that's it for the video. If you had your thoughts about these spells, or had your own favorite spells in this book, be sure to let me know in the comments. Otherwise, if you liked what you saw here, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.